Greetings, YouTube. Um, I am a fan of high fantasy, and I'm willing to swallow a whole heck of a lot in the pursuit of that. That is absurd. All the magic, the gold supplies, which make her so much out of whack with how much gold is in the real world. I prefer a silver currency system as opposed to a gold one. The gold should be a lot rarer than it is in games. Um, I'm just willing to accept a lot of those things. But when the parts that aren't high fantasy, those I want to be real. So if I drop an object, it falls. Okay, so I want the real world things to reflect the real world. Okay, and I don't think that's asking a lot. Um, it's one of the reasons I've railed against encumbrance systems because I don't think they reflect any kind of reality. It's the reason I've railed against the weights of uh, the absurd weights that they give the weapons because they don't reflect reality in the least. Um, and it's, I mean, often it's to me an example of people who have never actually picked up a weapon and give it just feel the balance of it, and it's not hard to do. Um, though I admit that I may have a little bit more experience in that because I make weapons as a hobby. But armor falls into that. Now I actually do make armor occasionally. Here we go. Here's a buckler. It's a buckler made out of a giant salad bowl, but it's a buckler. It's aluminum. It's relatively fast. Um, Got a nice tone, doesn't it? Um, I just think it's cool because it looks like a shiny moon. Um, one of the things they do in games is they have something, and it's very common for high fantasy games. I think that D&D was the first one to ever do it. I'm not sure on that one. But they have something called studded leather. Now, studded leather is a type of leather armor that never existed because it's always depicted as being supple with metal studs on it. And that was never a thing. Okay? There was real world leather armor, but real world leather armor is a lot like ballistic armor in the modern world. It was much more like plastic than it is when we think of leather. I'm trying to think, do I have any leather in my vicinity? No, I do not. But your average piece of leather is flexible. You know, your average leather coat, even a leather purse. That's what people experience. But if you've ever seen a leather knife sheath, okay, they're rigid. That is much more what you're going to look at when you have leather armor. That's heavy gauge treated leather that is been formed and shaped, and the stuff is rugged. There's a reason people used it for armor, not just because it was easier to acquire than like steel, or the methods required to, like, the skill and time it took doing, like, make mail, but because it was good, it worked. That's why they used it. But they also had padded armor, and uh, and as well as the undergarments for a lot of other types of armor, gambesons. And I've have some experience. I've worn a gambeson myself before under armor, and I've helped people get in and out of armor while they were wearing gambesons. And gambesons are the undergarment that you wear. But there's also padded armor, which is a much heavier version of a fabric armor. And padded armor isn't just quilted. It's not just like a packing blanket you can pick up from U-Haul. That's much more like a gambeson, which is kind of a padded tunic or that you wear under your armor for comfort, and which, yeah, because you're not going to want to wear mail directly on your skin. Well, if you're into that, I'm not going to judge. Now, padded armor is layers of fabric, linen, okay, and it could be like 12, 15 layers thick, and they could soak it in lime, and it becomes rigid. It becomes more like Kevlar in some regards. It's still somewhat flexible, but it has all these layers, and it's pretty good at stopping things. And it is the least expensive of all the armors because it is so readily available. It can be made by folks that do clothing, which is a far wider sphere of craftsmen than those that work in leather, smaller sphere, or those that work in, steels. So it's easier to acquire, it's easier to repair, and it can be quite good. I would recommend Todd's Workshop. It's a guy on YouTube, and I've got one of his T-shirts, who does videos about real-world historical weapons as well as movie stuff, because he actually makes props for movies. He's a very skilled craftsman. And what he's shown me about padded armor is really fascinating. The stuff is very good at even stopping arrows. It's quite fascinating. So I think that there's a place in our games, our high fantasy games, for padded armor, and I think we should lose the studded. So gamazins, for the most part, are just flavor, but I think they're important flavor. But padded should, to my mind, should take the slot which is currently occupied by leather, and then leather armor should take the slot is currently occupied by studded leather. Bob's your uncle. We're done. You now have a world that is far more likely to reflect some kind of a reality. And padded armor is going to be the stuff that no one's going to bat an eye at if you're wearing it around town. Not to mention, because it's linen, it's going to be the easiest thing under the sun to emblazon with coating, in the sense that you can dye it, so it's very easy to make it into a uniform. All the guards are wearing this type of padded armor. Maybe the guy that's in charge of the guards, he's got a mail shirt, but for the most part, the rest of the folks are wearing, padded armor because it's the cheapest, because it's the least difficult to wear for long terms, it's the easiest repair, and for your day-to-day life as a guard in a city, that's all you need. You don't need a heavy-duty suit of armor. If all of your guards in the city are required to wear plate, there's a problem with crime you really need to address. So let's talk about gamazins and padded armor and leather armor, and have them reflect just a modicum more of reality. And I would love to know who invented high fantasy studded leather. Who was the person that put it into a game? Because I don't know. I know there are people out there that know the history of our games a heck of a lot better than I do. So maybe some of you folks know where was the first example of studded leather as it is envisioned both in illustrations and in game mechanics for high fantasy role-playing games. I'd be fascinated in knowing that. That kind of thing makes me smile. Okay, so let's talk about getting rid of studded leather and putting padded armor into the world, because it just makes sense.